My cousin stole my life, and I handed it to her on a silver platter. I remember the exact moment. My lungs collapsed in my previous life, dying in a sterile hospital room while my family celebrated her Ivy League graduation. She built her success on my stolen work. Then, I woke up. I was 18 again, staring at the acceptance letter that ruined me. This time, when she reached for it, I didn't scream. I just smiled. I gave her the rope. Dust motes danced in the sharp morning light cutting through the kitchen blinds. I stared at them, my chest heaving, drawing in air that felt too thick, too real. My fingers dug into the cheap formica of the kitchen island. I wasn't in a hospital bed. The aggressive, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was gone, replaced by the low hum of the refrigerator. I looked down at my hands. They were unscarred. The IV tracks were gone. Nessa, are you even listening to me? Aunt Diane's voice sliced through the ringing in my ears. I blinked, my vision coming into sharp focus. She stood across the kitchen island, clutching a coffee mug like a weapon. Next to her, leaning against the counter with a practiced look of casual indifference, was Calypso, my cousin. On the table between us sat a thick, cream-colored envelope. The return address was printed in sharp, elegant crimson font. Harvard College, Office of Admissions. A wave of nausea hit me so hard, my knees buckled. I grabbed the edge of the counter to steady myself. It was May 14th, 4 years ago, the day the letters arrived. In my past life, this was the moment everything broke. I had torn open that envelope expecting my own name, only to find Calypso's. She had stolen my digital portfolio, copied my personal essay word for word, and submitted it under her own application. Because her parents had deep pockets and had hired an aggressive private consultant, the university swallowed her lie. When I tried to submit my own genuine work a week later, I was flagged for plagiarism. I had screamed. I had thrown things. I had threatened to call the admissions office and expose her. And in return, Aunt Diane and Uncle Robert had locked me in my room, cut off my phone plan, and systematically destroyed my reputation in our small town, branding me a jealous, unstable liar. The stress triggered a dormant autoimmune disease. Without health insurance or family support, I worked myself into an early grave by 22, dying alone while Calypso smiled for the cameras in Cambridge. Nessa, Diane snapped, her cheap floral perfume suffocating the space between us. Don't look at her like that. We all know you're disappointed about your state school waitlists, but you need to be happy for your cousin. She worked incredibly hard for this. Calypso offered a tight, sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. It's okay, Mom. I know Nessa's upset. I'd be upset too if I didn't get in anywhere. I stared at her, really looked at her. Her perfectly highlighted hair, the expensive athleisure she wore to lounge around the house, the absolute, unwavering entitlement radiating from her pores. In my previous life, I wanted to rip that smug look off her face. I wanted justice. Now, I just felt exhausted. And then, slowly, a cold, sharp clarity settled over my brain. Harvard wasn't just a brand. It was a crucible. It was late-night reading assignments that spanned hundreds of pages of dense academic theory. It was imposter syndrome, brilliant peers, and professors who could spot a fraud from 50 feet away. Calypso had never read a book she wasn't forced to. She couldn't write a coherent thesis statement if her life depended on it. She hadn't just stolen my admission. She had stolen a burden she was profoundly unequipped to carry. I didn't need to destroy her. I just needed to get out of her way. I released my white-knuckled grip on the counter and stood up straight. I took a deep, slow breath, tasting the stale coffee in the air. "You're right," I said, my voice shockingly steady. Diane blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" I said. "You're right." I pushed the envelope an inch closer to Calypso. "Congratulations, Calypso. You got in. You should be proud." Calypso's smug expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. She had been primed for a fight. She had wanted the drama, the validation of my tears to cement her victory, denying her that satisfaction was a small, immediate victory. "Well," Diane said, clearing her throat, recovering her aggressive posture, "I'm glad you're choosing to be mature about this, Nessa. It's the least you can do, considering we've kept a roof over your head since your parents passed." There it was, the ultimate trump card. "I know," I said, keeping my face entirely blank. "Which is why I've decided to move out." "Move out?" Calypso scoffed. "With what money? You don't even have a job." "I'll figure it out," I said, turning my back on them. I walked toward the hallway, every step feeling lighter than the last. "I'll be gone by the end of the week. You can turn my room into a walk-in closet for your Harvard gear." I didn't wait to see their reactions. I walked into my cramped, dusty bedroom and shut the door. I sat on the edge of the twin bed, pulling my knees to my chest. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I was 18. I was alive. My body didn't ache. My lungs were clear. I pulled out my battered laptop and opened a browser. I didn't care about a stolen acceptance letter anymore. I knew exactly what the stock market would do for the next 48 months. I knew which tech startups would explode and which crypto coins would spike and crash. I knew the exact software patent I had tried to develop in my hospital bed, the one I ran out of time to finish. Calypso wanted the ivy-covered brick and the prestige. She could have it. I wanted an empire. August descended with a thick, suffocating heat that made the asphalt shimmer. The house had become unbearable, transformed into a shrine dedicated to Calypso's impending Ivy League debut. Banners were ordered. A massive, catered going-away party was scheduled for the backyard. Relatives I hadn't seen in years were suddenly crawling out of the woodwork to pat Uncle Robert on the back and slip Calypso envelopes of cash. I had kept my promise. I didn't stay the week. I packed 2 duffel bags of clothes, my laptop, and my parents' old photo albums, and moved into a sublet above a dry cleaner on the wrong side of town. The rent was dirt cheap, and the air constantly smelled of perchloroethylene. But it was mine. I enrolled in the local community college, not for the degree, but for the free, high-speed campus Wi-Fi and the quiet corners in the library. The day of Calypso's departure party, I sat in my sweltering apartment, the window unit rattling aggressively as it tried and failed to cool the room. My laptop screen illuminated my face in the dim light. I was looking at a trading dashboard. Over the past 3 months, I had taken the miserable $3,000 I'd saved from working at a diner during high school and turned it into $15,000. I had aggressively shorted a prominent real estate company that I remembered collapsing in scandal in late 2022. The news had broken 2 days ago. My account balance had quintupled overnight. My phone buzzed on the desk. Aunt Diane's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring until it went to voicemail, then went back to coding. I was laying the architecture for a predictive data analytics tool, tailored for supply chain logistics. During the global shipping crisis of my past life, companies were bleeding millions because they couldn't accurately forecast port delays. I was building the bandage. The phone buzzed again. A text from Calypso. "You're seriously not coming to my party? Everyone is asking where you are." So embarrassing for you. I stared at the text. I could picture her, standing in the backyard, wearing a crimson sundress, holding a plastic cup of champagne, surrounded by fawning neighbors. I typed a quick response. Busy. Have a good trip. I blocked her number, put the phone on silent, and tossed it onto the mattress. 2 weeks later, the reality of Cambridge hit Calypso. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was knee-deep in a complex back-end bug, my eyes burning from the screen glare, when an unknown Massachusetts number lit up my phone. I answered it only because I thought it might be the server hosting company I was trying to contact. Hello, Nessa. Calypso's voice was completely stripped of its usual bravado. She sounded small, frantic. Who is this? I asked, leaning back in my cheap office chair. The springs squeaked loudly in the quiet room. Stop it, it's me. Listen, I need your help. I have an expository writing seminar paper due at 8 a.m. It's supposed to be a 10-page analysis of Foucault, and I don't understand any of the readings. The professor is a nightmare. He humiliates people in front of the whole class. I rubbed the bridge of my nose. And I need you to write it for me, she hissed, her tone shifting from desperate to demanding. You read that stuff for fun in high school. You can knock it out in a few hours. I'll Venmo you $100. A dry laugh scraped its way up my throat. $100? Calypso, you're at Harvard. You're one of the brightest young minds in the country. You don't need my help. Nessa, I'm not playing around. If I fail this paper, I'm going to be put on academic warning. The TA already flagged my first 2 assignments. Just write the damn paper. No. Dead silence on the other end of the line. What did you say? I said no. I'm busy. Write your own paper, Calypso. Or better yet, submit my old high school essays again. Oh, wait. The professors there actually check for plagiarism, don't they? You owe me, she shrieked, the panic finally breaking through. My parents let you live in our house for years. You owe us. I owe you nothing, I said softly. Welcome to the Ivy League, Calypso. Don't drown. I hung up. I blocked the Massachusetts number. Then, I turned back to my code. The cursor blinked steadily, waiting for me. I typed my next line, feeling a profound, quiet peace settle over my cramped, chemical-smelling apartment. The next 3 years were a blur of caffeine, cold sweat, and relentless momentum. I didn't sleep much. When you know the future, the fear of missing the window of opportunity is a constant, physical weight on your chest. By my 20th birthday, my analytics software, officially named Aegis Data Solutions, had caught the attention of a mid-sized logistics firm in Chicago. I sold them a localized license, used the capital to hire a small, remote development team, and expanded the platform's capabilities. That was when I met Allegan. Allegan Ford was a 60-something venture capitalist who had made his fortune in the 90s dot-com boom and never lost his appetite for a good gamble. He found my software through a mutual industry contact, flew me out to Seattle, and took me to a terrifyingly expensive steakhouse. He spent 2 hours grilling me on algorithms, market projections, and scalability. I didn't blink. I gave him the numbers I already knew were coming. He handed me a check for $2 million in seed funding before the dessert arrived. You've got dead eyes, kid, Allegan told me as we shook hands outside the restaurant, the damp Seattle air clinging to our coats. I mean that as a compliment. You don't look like someone who hopes they're going to win. You look like someone who already knows they have. I just know the market, Allegan. With his backing, Aegis scaled at a breakneck pace. I dropped out of community college. I moved out of the dry cleaner apartment and leased a modest but secure condo downtown. I bought a decent mattress. I went to doctors and caught the early warning signs of the autoimmune condition that had killed me in my past life, aggressively treating it before it could take root. And every so often, the ghost of my old life would drift across my radar. I kept tabs on the Kingsley family through a dummy Facebook account. Aunt Diane's page told a fascinating, heavily edited story. During Calypso's freshman year, there were endless photos. Calypso by the Charles River. Calypso wearing a Harvard sweatshirt. Calypso at a tailgating party. By sophomore year, the posts became less frequent. By junior year, there were no pictures of Cambridge at all. Instead, Diane started posting cryptic, defensive quotes about mental health and toxic academic environments. I didn't need to guess what was happening. I hired a private investigator for a single afternoon, a luxury I could easily afford, to run a background check. The report came back in 3 hours. Calypso had been placed on academic probation her first semester, caught utilizing a paid essay writing service her second semester, and quietly suspended for a year. She had tried to go back, failed 3 consecutive midterms, and subsequently lost her enrollment status completely. She was living in a rented apartment in Boston that Uncle Robert was bleeding his retirement fund to pay for, working retail, and telling her parents she was taking a sabbatical to launch a lifestyle brand. I read the report while sitting at my mahogany desk in the corner office of my new headquarters. I felt no pity. I felt no joy either. Just a cold, clinical validation of a theory I had proven correct 4 years after the acceptance letter. It was a crisp November evening. I was 22 years old, the CEO of a company valued at $40 million, and I was throwing a banquet. Aegis Data had just closed a Series B funding round that blew our projections out of the water. To celebrate and to network with the East Coast tech scene, Allegan and I had rented out the grand ballroom of the St. Regis in Boston. It was a lavish, unnecessary expense, but Allegan insisted. You need to show these blue blood investors that you aren't just some scrappy kid in a hoodie anymore, he had said, clapping me on the shoulder. Put on a dress, drink the good champagne, and let them kiss your ring. The ballroom was stunning. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over the tables, which were draped in heavy black linen and adorned with towering arrangements of white orchids. A string quartet played softly in the corner. The room was packed with venture capitalists, tech executives, and politicians. I stood near the head table, wearing a tailored, emerald green evening gown that cost more than my parents' cars combined. I held a flute of sparkling water. I still refused to touch alcohol, terrified of losing my sharp edge, and nodded along as a hedge fund manager rambled about interest rates. Excuse me, miss. The voice was faint, heavily masked by the clinking of silverware and polite laughter, but it cut through the noise like a gunshot in a quiet room. I froze. My grip on the champagne flute tightened. I knew that voice. I had spent 18 years listening to that voice. Whine, demand, and gloat. I turned slowly. A server was standing a few feet away, holding a silver tray of bacon-wrapped scallops. She was wearing the standard hotel catering uniform. Black slacks, a crisp, white button-down shirt, a black vest, and a neat bow tie. Her hair was pulled back into a severe, unflattering bun. She wasn't looking at my face. She was looking at the tray, her shoulders hunched, clearly exhausted, just trying to navigate the crowded room without dropping the appetizers. Would you care for a... she started, raising her eyes to meet mine. The words died in her throat. The color drained from Calypso's face so fast, I thought she was going to pass out. Her eyes went wide, darting from my face to my expensive gown, to the crowd of wealthy, powerful people hanging onto my every word. For 4 years, she had likely convinced herself I was rotting in some dead-end town, a failure who couldn't handle the pressure of real ambition. And here I was, the guest of honor in a room she was being paid minimum wage to clean up after. Her hands started to shake. The silver tray rattled ominously. I didn't smirk. I didn't glare. I just looked at her with the polite, distant curiosity one reserves for the hired help. "Yes," I said smoothly, reaching out and plucking a scallop from the trembling tray. "Thank you." Calypso didn't drop the tray. I almost wished she had. A loud, clattering mess would have given her an excuse to break eye contact, to flee to the kitchen and hide behind swinging metal doors. Instead, she stood absolutely paralyzed. Her knuckles turned stark white as she gripped the edges of the silver platter. The heavy, gold-flecked ballroom lighting caught the sheen of nervous sweat on her forehead. She looked older than 22. The aggressive confidence that used to animate her features was gone, replaced by a dull, hollow exhaustion. There were dark circles under her eyes, poorly concealed with cheap concealer. The tailored, expensive clothes her parents used to buy her had been traded for a stiff polyester vest that fit her awkwardly across the shoulders. "Nessa," she finally whispered. The word barely made it past her lips. It sounded like a question, a plea, and a realization, all wrapped into 2 syllables. I took a slow, deliberate bite of the scallop. It was perfectly cooked. "Hello, Calypso," I said. My voice was level, pitched just loud enough for her to hear over the string quartet playing a muted Vivaldi piece in the corner. The hedge fund manager to my left, completely oblivious to the tectonic plates shifting beneath this brief exchange, kept talking. "Which is why the European markets are going to contract by Q3. It's inevitable. You see the data, Nessa, right?" I didn't look away from my cousin. "Data rarely lies, Richard," I replied smoothly. "It only exposes what's already there." Calypso flinched. The tray in her hands tilted dangerously. A small ceramic ramekin of dipping sauce slid a fraction of an inch, threatening to tip over the edge. She scrambled to right it, her breathing shallow and ragged. "I didn't." She swallowed hard, her eyes darting frantically around the room, taking in the towering floral arrangements, the ice sculptures, the sheer concentration of wealth. Finally, her gaze snapped back to my tailored emerald gown. "I didn't know this was your event." "It's a big city," I said lightly, "but a small world." Allegan materialized at my elbow. He smelled of expensive scotch and Cuban cigars, bringing a booming, jovial energy that shattered the suffocating tension. "Nessa, they're looking for you near the ice luge. The guys from Sequoia want to talk numbers before they hit the bar too hard." Allegan clapped his hand on my shoulder, finally noticing the trembling server standing in front of us. He offered Calypso a polite, dismissive smile. "We're good here, sweetheart. Take those to the tables in the back." Calypso looked at Allegan, then back at me. I saw the exact moment the delusion shattered. For 4 years, she had likely survived her own failure by telling herself a story where I was struggling in a dead-end town, flipping burgers or ringing up groceries, regretting the day I walked out of her house. She had needed me to be a failure, so her own spectacular collapse wouldn't sting so much. Standing here, holding my appetizers while my billionaire mentor ushered me toward venture capitalists, the story disintegrated. She opened her mouth, perhaps to argue, perhaps to lay claim to me, to scream to the room that we were family, but the sheer weight of the room crushed the impulse. She was a catering waitress who had failed out of the very institution these people worshipped. I was the guest of honor. Calypso bowed her head, a sharp, jerky motion, and turned away. I watched her retreat, her posture stiff, weaving unsteadily through the crowd of laughing executives until she disappeared behind a heavy velvet curtain near the service elevators. "You know her?" Allegan asked, his sharp eyes missing nothing. "We went to high school together," I said, handing him my empty champagne flute. "Long time ago." "Right." Allegan chuckled, steering me toward the center of the room. "Well, don't let the ghosts drag you down. You have an empire to run, kid." I spent the next 3 hours shaking hands, memorizing faces, and locking down soft commitments for our next expansion phase. I didn't see Calypso again for the rest of the night. When I finally returned to my hotel suite at 2 in the morning, the silence was deafening. I kicked off my heels, leaving them on the plush carpet, and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Boston skyline. The city lights glittered like scattered diamonds against the black water of the harbor. I waited for the rush of vindication. I waited for the triumphant, petty joy of seeing my abuser brought low. It was the moment I would have fantasized about in my past life, lying in that hospital bed, suffocating slowly. But as I stared out at the city, I felt nothing but a cool, quiet emptiness. She wasn't a monster. She was just a pathetic, hollow girl who had tried to wear shoes 3 sizes too big, and she had crippled herself trying to walk in them. The revenge hadn't come from a grand, orchestrated plot. It had come from simply letting her have exactly what she demanded. I had handed her the steering wheel to a Formula One car, knowing she didn't even have a learner's permit. The crash was inevitable. My phone vibrated on the marble nightstand. I walked over and picked it up. An unknown number. I didn't need a predictive algorithm to know who it was. I swiped to ignore the call, blocked the number, and went to sleep. The fallout was delayed, but inevitable. 3 days after the banquet, I was back in Chicago, sitting in the glass-walled conference room of Aegis headquarters. I was reviewing the beta testing data for our new predictive weather routing feature when my executive assistant, David, knocked softly on the doorframe. "Sorry to interrupt, Nessa," David said, holding his tablet to his chest. "There's a woman at the front lobby security desk. She's demanding to see you. She says she's your aunt." I didn't look up from my laptop screen. "Diane Kingsley?" "Yes." "Security told her she needs an appointment, but she's causing a bit of a scene, threatening to call the press. Said something about you owing her money for raising you." David frowned, his professional demeanor slipping into genuine concern. "I can have building security escort her out, or call the police." I finally looked up Aunt Diane. She had flown all the way from our small hometown in Ohio to Chicago. Calypso must have finally broken down and told her parents exactly whose banquet she had been serving. The desperation was palpable. Uncle Robert's retirement fund was likely bone dry, and the sudden realization that the niece they threw away was now worth tens of millions of dollars was a reality Diane simply couldn't ignore. "No police," I said, closing my laptop. "Bring her up. Put her in conference room B. Don't offer her water or coffee." "Understood." 10 minutes later, I walked into the smaller, windowless conference room down the hall. Diane was pacing. She looked older, her heavily highlighted hair thinner than I remembered. Her face, tight with a mixture of anxiety and deeply ingrained entitlement. She wore a tailored pantsuit that looked like it had been pulled from the back of her closet, an outfit meant for a successful suburban real estate agent, completely out of place in a cutting-edge tech firm. She stopped pacing the second I walked in. Her eyes widened, taking in the sharp lines of my designer blazer, the quiet confidence in my posture, the absolute lack of fear. "Nessa," she breathed, forcing a wide, brittle smile. She took a step forward, her arms opening for a hug. "My God, look at you. We've been so worried about you." I didn't step back, but I didn't move forward either. I just looked at her. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable, until she awkwardly lowered her arms, clearing her throat. "Have a seat, Diane," I said, gesturing to the sleek, black leather chairs around the table. I didn't call her aunt. The omission wasn't lost on her. Her smile tightened, but she sat down, folding her hands tightly in her lap. I remained standing, leaning against the edge of the table, looking down at her. "It's been a long time," Diane started, her voice taking on that familiar, patronizing lilt she used whenever she was trying to manipulate a situation. "You disappeared on us, Nessa. Just vanished. Your Uncle Robert and I were heartbroken. But then Calypso called me this weekend. She told me about the St. Regis. She told me about this company." She gestured vaguely around the room. "I always knew you were a smart girl. I always told Robert, that girl is going to do something big one day. You told Robert I was a parasitic liar who was jealous of your daughter's talent." I corrected her. My voice was perfectly flat. "You locked me in my room for 3 days, so I couldn't contact the high school guidance counselor. You told the neighbors I was having a psychiatric break." Diane flinched, a flash of genuine anger crossing her face before she ruthlessly suppressed it. "We were trying to protect you from yourself," she lied smoothly. "You were grieving. You were confused. But that's all in the past now. We're family, Nessa. Blood is thicker than water. You flew 1,000 miles to tell me about water viscosity?" I asked. "Get to the point, Diane. My time is currently valued at roughly $4,000 an hour. You're cutting into my margins." Her jaw tightened. The friendly facade cracked, revealing the desperate, cornered animal underneath. "Calypso is struggling," Diane blurted out. "Harvard was. It was a highly toxic environment. They didn't support her. They set her up to fail. She's been living in Boston, trying to find her footing, but the economy is terrible. Robert had to take a second mortgage on the house to help her with rent." "That sounds like a poor financial decision on Robert's part." "She needs a job, Nessa." Diane leaned forward, slapping her palms onto the glass table. "A real job, with a salary that reflects her potential. I looked up your company. You have hundreds of employees. You could easily make her a project manager or a vice president of marketing. She has the Ivy League pedigree. She failed out in 3 semesters, Diane." The words dropped like an anvil. Diane stared at me, the blood completely draining from her face. How do you know that?" "Because I know how to run a background check," I said, pushing off the table and walking slowly toward the door. "I know she was caught buying essays online. I know she's currently working catering gigs through a temp agency. I know Robert is drowning in debt. I know all of it." "Then you know we need help," Diane shrieked, dropping the pretense entirely. Her voice echoed harshly off the glass walls. "You have millions. You owe us, Nessa. We took you in when your parents died. We fed you. We clothed you." I stopped with my hand on the metal door handle. I turned to look at her one last time. "You took a monthly stipend from the state for my foster care, which you used to lease a new Lexus." I said quietly. You fed me scraps while you hired private tutors for Calypso. And you stole my future to give her a head start she didn't deserve. Diane stood up, her face purple with rage. You ungrateful little bitch. I gave Calypso exactly what she wanted, I interrupted, my voice dropping an octave, cold and absolute. I gave her Harvard. I let her walk into a room full of apex predators covered in meat. If she got eaten, that is not my fault. That is the consequence of her own mediocrity. I opened the door. David was standing just outside. 2 burly security guards flanked behind him. David, please escort Miss Kingsley out of the building, I instructed, not looking back at the woman sputtering in the conference room. If she, or anyone else from her immediate family, attempts to enter this building or contact me again, file a restraining order and contact our legal team. Right away, Nessa. I walked down the hallway, the sound of Diane screaming fading behind me as the heavy glass doors of the security vestibule sealed shut. I walked back into my corner office, sat down at my mahogany desk, and opened my laptop. The code base was waiting. The future was waiting. I didn't owe the past another second of my time. Money does not cure everything. It just changes the upholstery of your suffering. In my previous life, I died on a Tuesday in a crowded county hospital ward. The air had smelled of bleach and impending grief. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a sound that drilled into my skull, and every breath I took felt like inhaling crushed glass. The autoimmune disease had ravaged my lungs and joints, accelerated by malnutrition, unrelenting stress, and the sheer, crushing weight of having no one in the world who gave a damn if I lived or died. In this life, I lay back on a heated leather recliner in a private, soundproofed suite overlooking Lake Michigan. The air smelled of eucalyptus and expensive lavender oil. A state-of-the-art IV pump whirred silently next to me, feeding a cocktail of biologics and immunosuppressants directly into my vein. I caught the disease 3 years earlier this time. I had the capital to hire the best rheumatologists in the Midwest. They ran panels that most insurance companies would flat out reject. We caught the rogue antibodies before they could scar my lung tissue, before they could permanently warp my joints. But the disease was still there, a shadow lurking in my marrow, kept at bay only by aggressive, expensive chemistry and relentless vigilance. Your inflammatory markers are down another 4%, Nessa, Dr. Simon Hayes said, tapping his stylus against his tablet. He was a pragmatic, sharply dressed man in his late 40s, who treated me less like a patient and more like a high-yield bond. The new biologic is doing its job, but your cortisol levels are a mess. You aren't sleeping. I sleep, I said, watching the clear liquid drip down the IV tubing. Just not as much as you'd like. You're sleeping 3 hours a night, Simon corrected, pulling up a chart. Your assistant, David, sends me your schedule. You were on a conference call with Tokyo at 3 a.m., and you were back in the office by 7 a.m. You are 22 years old, acting like a machine that doesn't require maintenance. This disease thrives on stress. You know this. I have an IPO to prepare for, Simon. And what good is a billion-dollar valuation if you stroke out before the opening bell? He set the tablet down and looked at me, his professional detachment slipping just enough to show genuine frustration. You beat the odds. You caught this early. Stop daring it to come back. I closed my eyes. The truth was, I didn't know how to stop. The momentum was the only thing keeping the memories of my previous death at bay. If I slowed down, if I sat still in a quiet room, I could still feel the phantom ache in my chest. I could still feel the terror of suffocating in that county hospital bed. Work wasn't just my ambition. It was my armor. When the infusion finished, I took a private elevator down to the underground garage. My driver, a quiet former Marine named Thomas, opened the door of the town car. I slid into the back, the soft leather cool against my skin. "Back to the office, Miss Hastings?" "No," I said, rubbing my temples. "Take me to Allegan's place." Allegan lived in a sprawling, modernist penthouse in the Gold Coast neighborhood. When I arrived, he was standing on his terrace, a tumbler of scotch in his hand, watching the gray storm clouds roll in over the lake. He wore a heavy wool sweater and looked older than he had in Boston. He didn't turn around when I walked out onto the terrace, the wind immediately whipping my hair across my face. "You look like hell, kid," he said, taking a sip of his drink. "Good afternoon to you, too, Allegan." I leaned against the glass railing next to him. The drop to the street below was dizzying. "Simon yelled at me." "Simon is a highly paid professional who tells you the truth," Allegan replied. "I pay him a retainer specifically, so he doesn't sugarcoat things for you." I looked at him, surprised. "You pay Simon?" "I introduced you to him. I made sure he treats you like his only patient." Allegan finally turned to look at me, his pale blue eyes sharp. "You are the smartest founder I've ever backed, Nessa. You see corners before the market even approaches them. But you're running from something. I saw it the day I met you in Seattle, and I see it now." I gripped the cold metal rail. "I'm not running. I'm building." "You're building a fortress," Allegan corrected gently. "And fortresses are built by people who expect a siege." He set his glass down on a small patio table. "We go public in 8 months. The S1 is drafted. The underwriters are drooling. You have won. Aegis is going to make you richer than God. But you have to figure out how to live in the castle you built, Nessa. Because right now, you're just standing on the walls, waiting for an army that isn't coming." I stared out at the dark, churning water of Lake Michigan. I wanted to tell him about the hospital bed. I wanted to tell him about the cousin who stole my life, and the fact that I had already died once. But those words belonged to a different reality. "I'll take the weekend off," I offered quietly. Allegan snorted. "You don't even know how to spell weekend." "But it's a start." The army I had been waiting for finally arrived 3 weeks later. It wasn't a legion. It was a single, desperate sniper shot. I was sitting in conference room A, going over the quarterly server costs, when David walked in. He didn't have his tablet. He just held a single, printed sheet of paper. His face was entirely devoid of color. "Nessa," he said, his voice tight, "we have a situation." I didn't panic. Panic was for people who hadn't anticipated the variables. I simply closed my laptop and gave him my full attention. "What is it?" "I just got an email from Rachel Foster. She's the senior investigative tech reporter at the Chronicle." David placed the paper on the desk and slid it toward me. "She's reaching out for comment on a piece she's publishing on Friday. It's a hit piece, Nessa. A massive one." I looked down at the printout. It was a standard journalistic inquiry, outlining the core allegations of an upcoming article and offering the subject a chance to respond. As I read the bullet points, a cold, sharp spike of amusement pierced the tension in my chest. Allegation 1. The foundational predictive algorithm for Aegis Data Solutions was not originally authored by Nessa Hastings. Allegation 2. The code was stolen from a family member's high school AP computer science project. Allegation 3. Nessa Hastings utilized predatory legal threats to silence the original creator and force them out of the tech industry entirely. Calypso. She had finally hit rock bottom. With her parents' money gone, her Ivy League pedigree exposed as a fraud, and her prospects reduced to hourly catering shifts, she had decided to play her absolute last card, the victim card. She had spun a narrative portraying herself as the brilliant, naive cousin who was robbed by the ruthless, cutthroat CEO. In the current cultural climate, a story about a wealthy tech founder crushing a vulnerable, marginalized family member was absolute clickbait gold. "Our legal team is already drafting a cease and desist," David said quickly, misreading my silence. "We can hit the Chronicle with a defamation injunction before the end of the day. We'll bury them in paperwork." "No," I said, pushing the paper back to him. "No?" David blinked. "Nessa, if this goes live, it could spook the underwriters. It could delay the IPO. If we send a cease and desist, it looks like a cover-up. Rachel Foster is a bulldog. She hates corporate bullying. If we threaten her with lawyers, she'll just publish the piece on a secure Substack and frame us as oppressive." I stood up and smoothed the front of my blazer. "Set up a meeting. In person. Just me and Foster." "Are you sure?" "Positive. Get her here tomorrow morning." Rachel Foster arrived at 9 a.m. sharp. She was a woman in her late 30s, with a sharp bob, wearing a worn leather jacket over a silk blouse. She carried herself with the cynical, aggressive posture of someone who spent her life listening to billionaires lie. She didn't accept the coffee David offered. She sat across from me in the glass conference room, pulled out a digital recorder, and set it on the table between us. "Ms. Hastings," Rachel started, her tone brisk and entirely devoid of warmth. "I appreciate you taking the time. Let's get right to it. My source claims you stole the Aegis baseline code from her during the summer of your senior year of high school. She claims you locked her out of a shared hard drive and utilized your mentor, Allegan Ford, to blacklist her in Boston." I didn't blink. I didn't raise my voice. I simply reached under the table and pulled out a thick, black binder. I placed it next to her recorder. "I don't deal in narratives, Ms. Foster. I deal in data," I said. "And the beautiful thing about data is that it leaves a permanent, irrefutable footprint." I flipped the binder open. "Tab 1, I said, pointing to a stack of printed logs. "The complete GitHub commit history for the Aegis baseline code. You will notice the initial commits were made 4 years ago, originating from an IP address tied to a public library in Ohio, continuing to a router registered to a cheap apartment above a dry cleaner. You'll also notice the coding style, the specific back-end shortcuts, and the syntax match every subsequent line of code I have written since." Rachel stared at the logs, her journalistic skepticism warring with the hard evidence in front of her. "Tab 2, I continued, turning the page. "My cousin's academic record from Harvard University. You'll see she failed out in 3 semesters. You will also see a disciplinary flag from her sophomore year, where she was caught purchasing essays from an online ghostwriting service." Rachel's eyes widened slightly. "You got her academic records?" "I have the resources to find what I need," I said flatly. "But let's look at tab 3. This is the most important one." I flipped to a heavily highlighted document. "This is the admissions essay my cousin submitted to Harvard. It's a compelling, deeply emotional piece about overcoming the trauma of losing a parent. It won her a spot in their freshman class." I slid a second document next to it. "And this is a time-stamped Google Doc from my personal, secured cloud drive, dated 3 months before her submission. It is the exact same essay, word for word, Because it's about my parents, who died in a car crash when I was 14. My cousin's parents are currently alive and living in Ohio. Silence descended on the conference room. The soft hum of the air conditioning was the only sound. Rachel Foster looked at the two essays. She read the first paragraph of each. Then, she slowly reached out and turned off her digital recorder. "She lied to me," Rachel said, her voice dropping its aggressive edge, replaced by a cold, professional fury. "She has lied to everyone her entire life," I corrected gently. "She is a drowning woman, Miss Foster." She threw a grappling hook, hoping to catch on to my ship, to pull herself up. "If you publish her story, you aren't exposing a corporate tyrant. You are just handing a megaphone to a pathological fraud." Rachel sat back in her chair, staring at the black binder. She was a good journalist. She knew a dead end when she saw the concrete wall. But she also knew a bigger story when it was sitting right in front of her. The Chronicle doesn't kill pieces once they've been pitched to the editorial board, Rachel said slowly, tapping her pen against the glass table. "I have to write something." "Then write the truth," I said. "Write a piece about the myth of meritocracy. Write about how Ivy League admissions can be bought with a consultant's check and a stolen essay, but the free market eventually crushes incompetence. You can use the documents in the binder. Redact her name if you want. I don't care about ruining her. I just want her to stop wasting my time." Rachel looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. The cynicism in her eyes shifted into a deep, genuine respect. "You're a terrifying woman, Miss Hastings." "I'm just a woman who refuses to die twice," I said softly. Rachel took the binder. She didn't publish a hit piece. That Friday, the Chronicle ran a front-page feature titled "The Architecture of a Fraud: When Elite Pedigree Meets Silicon Reality." Rachel didn't name Calypso explicitly, referring to her only as an anonymous, failed Ivy League student who attempted to blackmail a prominent tech CEO. But Rachel used the redacted essay. She used the story of the stolen admission. She brutally, surgically dismantled the delusion that a prestigious brand name could substitute for actual capability. The article went viral. It was shared across every tech forum, every business school curriculum, and every venture capital boardroom on the East Coast. Calypso's name wasn't printed, but anyone who knew her, anyone who had gone to high school with us, anyone in her dwindling social circle in Boston, connected the dots immediately. The temporary catering agency she worked for let her go the next day to avoid the bad press. Uncle Robert's country club acquaintances stopped returning his calls. The carefully constructed facade of the Kingsley family collapsed, not with an explosion, but with a pathetic, whimpering sigh. I sat on Allegan's terrace that Friday evening, a glass of sparkling water in my hand. The Chicago skyline was glittering against the twilight. The phantom ache in my chest, the lingering ghost of my previous death, felt incredibly distant. Allegan walked out, carrying his scotch. He looked at the tablet resting on the table, displaying the Chronicle headline. "You didn't just beat her, Nessa," he said, taking a sip. "You erased her." I looked out at the city, feeling the cold, clean wind against my face. "No," I replied, the truth of it settling deep into my bones. She erased herself. I just finally let her go. Snow fell in dirty, wet clumps across the Ohio highway, turning the landscape into a bruised, gray smudge. I sat in the back of the rented SUV, watching the familiar, depressing sprawl of my hometown roll past the tinted glass. I hadn't been back in 4 years. I hadn't planned on ever coming back. But legal tethers are stubborn things. My parents had left behind a small, heavily wooded plot of land on the county line, held in a trust until I turned 23. To finalize the transfer and liquidate the asset, I needed to sign the paperwork in person at the county clerk's office. It was a formality, a 3-hour detour in my schedule, but it felt like stepping into a graveyard. My driver, Thomas, navigated the slush-covered streets with military precision. "Where to next, Miss Hastings?" I looked down at my phone. The deed transfer was complete. I had a flight back to Chicago in 4 hours. I should have told him to head straight to the airport. "Take a left on Elm," I said quietly. Thomas didn't question it. He flicked the turn signal, and the heavy SUV glided down the street where I had spent my teenage years. The neighborhood looked exactly the same, suspended in a state of middle-class stagnation, except for one house. Aunt Diane and Uncle Robert's 2-story colonial sat at the end of the cul-de-sac. The meticulously manicured lawn, I remembered, was dead and overgrown with winter weeds. The paint on the porch railing was peeling, and hammered into the frozen dirt of the front yard was a bright, glaring neon sign. "Bank owned. Notice of foreclosure. Pull over," I instructed. Thomas eased the car to the curb, keeping the engine running. The heater hummed, a low, steady rhythm. I unbuckled my seatbelt and rolled down the window just an inch, letting the biting, metallic smell of impending snow filter into the warm cabin. A rusted, mid-2000s sedan was parked in the driveway. The trunk was popped open. A moment later, the front door of the house opened, and Calypso walked out. She was carrying a cardboard box packed with winter coats. She wore faded jeans and a bulky, shapeless sweatshirt. The designer bags, the perfectly styled hair, the aggressive aura of superiority, all of it was gone. She looked frail. Her shoulders were hunched against the wind, and her face was pale and drawn. She shoved the box into the trunk, slamming it shut with a metallic rattle. She stood there for a moment, her hands resting on the cold metal, her breath pluming in the freezing air. Then she turned her head and saw the black SUV idling at the curb. She didn't run this time. She didn't drop a tray or look away. She just stared. I opened my door and stepped out onto the slushy asphalt. The cold bit through my tailored wool coat immediately, but I didn't button it. I walked around the back of the SUV and stopped at the edge of the driveway. We stood 10 feet apart. The silence between us was heavier than the snow. "They took the house," Calypso said. Her voice was flat, scraped entirely clean of emotion. It wasn't an accusation. It was just a fact. "Dad filed for bankruptcy last month. Mom moved into a studio apartment near the interstate. I'm taking the rest of my stuff to a friend's couch." I looked at the foreclosure sign. "I see that." Calypso wrapped her arms around her chest, shivering as the wind picked up. "Did you come to gloat?" "Because you already won, Nessa. The article did exactly what you wanted. You burned us to the ground." "I didn't write the article," I replied, my voice steady. "And I didn't come to gloat. I just had to finalize my parents' estate. Driving by was a mistake." She let out a short, bitter laugh that sounded more like a cough. "A mistake, right. You don't make mistakes. You just calculate." She took a step closer. Her eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with dark bruised circles. "I just want to know one thing. Why didn't you fight me? 4 years ago, when the letter came, you knew I stole your essay. You knew I took your spot. You had the original drafts on your laptop. You could have destroyed me right then and there, but you just gave it to me. Why?" I looked at her, seeing the desperation in her posture. She needed a reason. She needed to believe I had orchestrated this elaborate, multi-year revenge plot, because it would mean she was bested by a genius, rather than destroyed by her own incompetence. Because you were already drowning, Calypso, I said softly. I just chose not to throw you a life preserver. She blinked, the words hitting her like a physical blow. You thought Harvard was a prize, I continued, stepping slightly closer, the snow crunching under my leather boots. You thought it was a crown you could just put on your head, and it would make you smart and capable and important. But I knew what it really was. It was a gauntlet. I knew you couldn't do the work. I knew if I let you walk through those gates, you would expose yourself to the world in a way I never could. You set me up. Her voice cracked. No. I shook my head, my breath creating a white cloud between us. I stepped out of your way. That's the hardest truth for you to swallow, isn't it? I didn't ruin your life, Calypso. I just let you live it. A tear slipped down her cheek, freezing almost instantly in the bitter wind. She didn't wipe it away. The realization was finally sinking in. The monster under her bed wasn't me. It was her own profound inadequacy. I have nothing, she whispered. You have exactly what you earned, I said. I didn't feel a rush of triumph. I didn't feel the catharsis I had spent my previous life praying for. I just felt cold. I looked at the crumbling house, at the rusted car, at the broken girl standing in the driveway, and I realized I had absolutely nothing left to gain from this place. I turned my back on her and walked toward the SUV. Nessa, she called out, her voice cracking with a sudden, sharp desperation. I stopped, my hand on the door handle, but I didn't look back. I'm sorry, she sobbed, the sound muffled by the wind. I'm so sorry I took it from you. I opened the car door and slid into the warm leather seat. Let's go, Thomas, to the airport. The SUV pulled away from the curb. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. The phantom ache in my chest, the lingering shadow of my previous death, the crushing weight of the injustice I had carried for years, finally dissolved. It was gone. I was finally, truly free. Wall Street smelled of ozone, expensive cologne, and sheer, unfiltered adrenaline. It was 8 months later, early September. The morning sun was cutting sharp angles through the massive windows of the New York Stock Exchange. The trading floor was a sea of chaotic, synchronized motion. Screens flashing red and green, voices shouting over the low roar of 1,000 simultaneous conversations. I stood on the balcony overlooking the floor, wearing a sharp, tailored black suit. My hands were resting on the polished wooden railing. Today was the day. Aegis Data Solutions was going public. Allegan stood to my right, looking like a king surveying a conquered territory. He wore a custom navy suit and a smile that reached all the way to his sharp, blue eyes. To my left stood David, holding a pristine leather binder containing the final SEC filings, and Simon, my doctor, who had insisted on flying out just to make sure my blood pressure didn't spike during the opening bell. Look at them down there, Allegan said, his voice carrying over the din of the floor. They're hungry. The institutional buyers have been circling the pre-market data all morning. We priced at 42 a share, Nessa. My brokers are telling me we'll open at 60. I looked down at the sea of traders. Data doesn't lie, Allegan. No, it doesn't. He turned to me, his expression softening into something incredibly rare for him. Genuine affection. "You did it, kid. You built the fortress." "We built it," I corrected, looking at him. "I just drew the blueprints." Simon checked his smartwatch. 10 minutes to the bell. "How are you feeling, Nessa? Any tightness in your chest? Joint pain?" I took a slow, deep breath. I pulled the air deep into my lungs, past my ribs, expanding my chest fully. It didn't catch. It didn't burn. There was no crushed glass, no suffocating pressure. My body was a machine that belonged entirely to me, functioning exactly as it was supposed to. The autoimmune disease was asleep, suppressed by science, money, and the absolute absence of the stress that had killed me in my past life. "I feel perfect, Simon," I said, offering him a small, rare smile. "I've never felt better." A floor manager in a sharp gray blazer approached us, holding a clipboard. "Ms. Hastings, it's time to take your position at the podium." I nodded. Allegan stepped back, gesturing for me to lead the way. We walked up the short flight of carpeted stairs to the bell podium. The massive brass bell hung, suspended above us, a symbol of extreme capitalism, of beginnings and endings. A crowd of photographers and financial journalists had gathered at the base of the balcony, their lenses pointed directly at us. I stepped up to the button. The digital clock on the wall above the trading floor clicked down. 9:28. I thought about the hospital room. I thought about the beige walls, the smell of bleach, the absolute certainty that my life had amounted to nothing but a stolen footnote in someone else's success story. I thought about the girl who died in that bed, her lungs giving out, her heart stopping, terrified, and utterly alone. 9:29. I thought about the kitchen island 4 years ago, the cream-colored envelope, the smug look on Calypso's face, the moment I realized I had been given a second chance, not to seek revenge, but to simply rewrite the code of my own existence. 10 seconds. The floor manager raised his hand. 5, 4, 3. I placed my hand on the button. I didn't look at the cameras. I looked straight ahead, past the flashing lights, past the numbers scrolling across the massive LED boards, staring into the absolute certainty of my own future. 2, 1. I pressed the button. The bell rang. It was a deep, resonant, deafening sound that vibrated through the floorboards and traveled straight up my spine. The trading floor erupted into cheers. The numbers on the boards began to spin frantically as the opening trades executed. Aegis Data Solutions was officially on the board. The ticker symbol, AGIS, flashed a brilliant, blinding green. Allegan clapped me on the back, pulling me into a brief, fierce hug. David was cheering. Camera flashes went off in a blinding staccato rhythm, capturing the exact moment a 23-year-old girl cemented her legacy. I stood at the podium, the sound of the bell still ringing in my ears, washing over me like a baptism. I wasn't reborn the day I woke up in my teenage bedroom. I was reborn right here. I took one more deep breath, tasting the ozone and the adrenaline. I let it out slowly, a long, steady exhale. The ghost of my past was finally, permanently dead, and I was gloriously, fiercely alive. If you felt this story deep in your bones, if you know what it's like to survive the people who were supposed to protect you, hit that like button. We all have ghosts in our past, but living well is the only real revenge. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that they are the architect of their own future, not a victim of their circumstances. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family to protect your peace? Let me know. And don't forget to subscribe for more grounded, emotional stories every single week.